I think there's a risk that we're stuck in the old doom loop of tax increases, spending cuts, weaker growth, and actually a worse outlook for the public finances than we would otherwise have had.
What do you think Rishi Sunak will do? We know, he had diametrically opposed ideas on the economy. We heard that throughout the summer. Liz Truss had a set of ideas. She enacted those ideas. They didn't go down well for whatever reason, the timing, no OBR underpinning, whatever it might have been. And most of them had to be reversed upon. So what do you think Rishi Sunak is going to do?
Well, first, sorry, can I just correct one thing first? I didn't actually advise on the mini budget. My last meeting conversation with Liz Truss was actually before she became Prime Minister. Okay. And I had no contact either with her or Kwasi Kwarteng when they took up their roles. I was certainly one of the people behind the overall strategy of Trussonomics. So, focus on growing the economy, rebalancing fiscal and monetary policy, and above all, a major program of supply side reforms.
Did you support the mini? Did you support the mini budget, but perhaps thought that other factors were not right around it?
Well, I saw the mini budget at the same time everybody else did. I think it's worth stressing that as an outsider, it wouldn't have been appropriate for me to be involved in sort of pre-budget discussions. There's all sorts of secrecy rules around that. So when the budget came out, I was surprised by significant elements of it, including the cut in the 45p higher rate of income tax. And I think that's one of the things that spooked the markets as well. So I'm still somebody who believes that the overall strategy was right, but the timing was wrong, the sequencing was wrong. I think there's also a fair amount of bad luck in it. If you look, for example, at the big sell-off in the gilt market, a lot of that was to do with the liability-driven investment strategies of pension funds. That's not something I think that can be blamed on Liz Truss. But we are where we are. I only had a small part in Trussonomics, but I would clearly regret the uncertainty that's caused for many people, particularly the turmoil in the mortgage market. And there's no doubt at all it could have been done an awful lot better, which is an understatement than it actually was.
So what do you think, with all that water under the bridge, and it was quite traumatic for many people. There are many people who are suffering the consequences of the mishandling of the mini budget in terms of extra money on their mortgage payments. What do you now think, from what you know about Rishi Sunak and from what we all know about him, because he pretty much told us what he was going to do back in July and over the summer, what do you think his economic policy will be? What might we see in the budget?
Well, first of all, two big positives. One is that, assuming it is Rishi Sunak, and I think that's correct, we will now get a period of political stability that we desperately need. Secondly, related to that, we'll also get a period of stability in the markets. It's interesting that expectations for interest rate increases from the Bank of England have already fallen quite sharply, and that's the key to getting mortgage rates down again. So in the short term, this is clearly good news. I do still have concerns about direction of policy. Others have already talked about this, but it does look like we might end up both with tighter monetary policy, but also tighter fiscal policy, austerity 2.0. So I think there's a risk that we're stuck in the old doom loop of tax increases, spending cuts, weaker growth, and actually a worse outlook for the public finances than we would otherwise have had.
Now, sorry, I said budget, I meant statement, of course, on October the 31st. The Truss government said they wanted to get 2.5% growth over the next 2 years. Of course, they only ended up having 45 days. What are your predictions in terms of growth? And do you think that Rishi Sunak is going to be as fixated on growth as Liz Truss appeared to be? And no one's necessarily saying that was wrong. That was the wrong thing to do.
Well, first of all, I think that 2.5% growth target was achievable. We've had a long period since basically the global financial crisis where UK productivity growth has been far lower than you might otherwise expect it to be. If we've been able to close at least part of that gap, then I think we could realistically have looked at growth of 2.5%. I do think now, though, that's going to be a lot harder to achieve, because we're pressing ahead with plans to raise taxes going into a recession and potentially to cut spending as well. I think the economic outlook now is worse than it would otherwise have been. So to some extent, the fact that government bond yields have fallen is partly good news. It's the pricing out of a risk premium, but it's also partly bad news because I think people are now expecting a much weaker outlook for growth than we would otherwise have had. And yes, I mean, if you go around a graveyard, there's no inflation, lots of stability, and very low interest rates, but that's not necessarily what we want.
No, I think that's a very fair way of putting it. Julian, thank you. That's Julian Jessop, who is an economist who advised Liz Truss before, nothing to do with necessarily the mini budget.